I'm Shahar Azani, and this is Israel at War. As Israel's war against Hamas rages on, questions still persist about the future of Gaza the day after. Last year, we covered right here on JBS a special project called Whispered in Gaza, which shined a light on a series of courageous testimonies through animated videos of ordinary Gazans sharing the life under Hamas. The videos were based on interviews carried out by the New York-based not-for-profit Center for Peace Communications and provided a rare opportunity, more important than ever now, to listen to ordinary Gazans who shared with the world what life was like under the cruel rule of Hamas. These voices are now more important than ever as we see what's transpiring on the ground. Recently, the Center for Peace Communications connected anti-Hamas Gazans with lawmakers in the United States, Canada, and Europe, testifying to the Hamas-UNRWA collusion. They asked these governments to reduce UNRWA funding and back pilot projects for non-Hamas aid distribution and self-rule. To hear more about this important initiative, I'm thrilled to welcome back on JBS the Center's founder and president, Joseph Braude. Joseph is an author and expert on the nexus of culture and politics in Arab societies and an active presence in the region's media and policy debates. Joseph developed his Arabic to broadcast quality over a 7-year stint on Moroccan national radio, I had to put that in, and added Persian to his Arabic and Hebrew as a graduate student at the University of Tehran. Joseph, so excited you're back with us on JBS. Welcome.
Thank you, Shahar. It's great to be here.
So I want to start with, we mentioned Whispered in Gaza, and before we touch on the current initiative, I want to ask you about that project. What has been the impact, the follow-up to that series of incredible, I must say, videos? And if you, our viewers, did not get a chance to watch them, please do on the website of the center and through JBS. Please share with us what kind of reactions and what was the follow-up to those videos?
Yeah, so the videos were viewed 20 million times on social media. It was released in 7 languages. The most significant impact was in Gaza, where on July, a lot of people don't know that on July 30th of last year, before October 7th, Gazans organized another round of anti-Hamas street demonstrations. And they used Whispered in Gaza as a tool of mobilization because it provided their own narrative in a powerfully and emotionally riveting package for dissemination. But after October 7th, it also took on a new relevance. It was written about all over the world and viewed many times more. And we introduced a new series called Voices from Gaza, in which Gazans have been commenting in real time, essentially, on life under the unfolding war. And that was released in partnership with the Free Press and got a lot of attention as well. I think people recognize that you have to hear Gazans unplugged, if you will, when they're not being minded or monitored or patrolled by Hamas, to understand their perspective on what's happening.
Right. At the time, I remember I asked you about how you got in touch with Gazans, ordinary Gazans, behind the iron wall of Hamas's dictatorial rule. I want to ask you now, you were mentioning in the course of the war, you have the voices from Gaza. How do you get in touch with the people on the ground in Gaza?
Well, it's actually easier for us to engage Gazans now than before. And the reason is, there's 2 reasons. The first is that they have a hunger to express themselves, but are afraid. And as it has now become known in Gaza that there is this platform that we have created that enables Gazans to speak freely and safely through filtration and so on, and reach the outside world. Everybody wants to say their piece.
Right. And what are you hearing? Let's talk for a minute about these voices. What are you hearing from these Gazans?
So there is growing anger at Hamas. Now, there has always been a substantial number of Gazans who don't want to be ruled by Hamas.
Right. I remember, Joseph, sorry to interrupt you, but I remember from before the war, we've seen evidence of demonstrations against Hamas, or at least attempted demonstrations in Gaza, right?
In 2019, there were 1,000 brave young people who took to the streets and protested Hamas rule under the banner "We Want to Live," Bidna Naish,
Bidna
which was
Naish.
a repudiation of the so-called culture of death that Hamas espouses. And they did it again in 2023. But the world paid little attention to that strand in Gazan society. And obviously, Hamas paid a lot of attention to it, and they shot at them, they jailed and tortured them, they punished their families collectively, and they threatened their families abroad in the US, in Europe, that if they opened their mouths, then their relatives at home would be punished.
Wow. So these voices that you're hearing from ordinary Gazans are telling you what about the current situation and in general about Hamas, the reality of life under Hamas.
Right. So these are Gazans with a range of views about Israel. I want to be very clear that it's possible to be anti-Hamas and anti-Israel at the same time, and a lot of Gazans adopt that outlook. But they fault Hamas for having started a war that has caused enormous damage to civilians while hiding underground and leaving civilians to suffer. They fault Hamas for stealing aid, not only recently, but for a generation, to pad the pockets of the wealthy leadership that live abroad, and to fuel a war machine that only compounds the damage to the population. So they are fed up and they want something different. They don't necessarily agree on what that alternative should be. But if it were a referendum on whether Hamas should continue to rule Gaza, Hamas would lose that referendum.
So you think that the surveys, the polls that were published, or the notions that the majority of Gazans support Hamas, or the majority of Palestinians in general in the West Bank and how does that work with your findings, the supposed popularity
so first of all,
of Hamas?
We're familiar with the polling data going back years. We've gone through all of it very carefully. There's a lot of polling data that supports what I've just said. There's a poll on the eve of October 7th that shows 70% of Gazans in favor of Hamas disarming and being replaced by an alternative leadership. 73% of Gazans saying that Hamas institutions are corrupt. You're right, there's a difference in public opinion between Gaza and the West Bank. In general, Hamas has been more popular in the West Bank, where it doesn't rule the population, than in Gaza. Actually, and it's sort of vice versa. The Palestinian Authority in Gaza, the grass is always greener.
Right.
So there is a lot of polling data about opposition to Hamas on the local level, and there's also contradictory results, which shows how problematic it is to do polling at gunpoint, which is what polling in Gaza is. Now, what we add in terms of our understanding is we don't do polls. We don't send up survey questions to thousands of Gazans, but we speak at great length with hundreds of Gazans. Not just questions, but we get to know them.
Because we know with polling questions, it can play either way. Depending on how you phrase a question, you'll get the results that you may intend to get. So in that regard, having profound conversations with Gazans on the ground provide real intelligence and understanding into the reality there.
Yeah, ultimately, when you have both, that's the best. So you can gain certain insights from polls of a large number of people, and then you gain important insights from real human engagement over a long period of time.
Right. So that really provides a real insight. And looking into the history of the objection to Hamas's methods, there is actually ground for hope. There is a beginning of an understanding of there is somebody we can actually work with, that the world can work with to transition Gaza from Hamas. Do you agree?
So this is the trend in all the countries and the areas in the region that are dominated by Iran or its proxies, Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq. There is tremendous anger at the regime because everyone understands that the local governing actor has run the country into the ground and wants something different. and they are silenced by force, and that only makes them angrier. Now, the question of what is the alternative and how does one develop it under these very fraught international and regional conditions is a complicated one, but that's also why you, as you raised in the introduction, you wanted to talk about our initiative. And there is a will within Gaza from many people, including veterans of those anti-Hamas street demonstrations and others, to actually forge or pilot self-rule. And what they are arguing is that there needs to be protected areas, really, truly cordoned off and protected from Hamas assault,
Right.
where non-Hamas Gazans would have an opportunity to begin to organize self-rule, as well as you said, build alternative aid distribution mechanisms that would end the UNRWA dominance of that entire sector, which has been so harmful to Gazans writ large.
Joseph, let's talk about that for a minute, about the collusion, the UNRWA-Hamas collusion, what we call the existing reality on the ground for too many years. In the course of the operation, the Israeli Defense Forces have been able to uncover, immense Hamas infrastructure within UNRWA facilities, schools, aid that's being transitioned directly to Hamas, employees of Hamas who are beneficiaries of UNRWA. One of the lessons that we tell ourselves since October 7th is the time of words is over and it's time for deeds. It's time for make a difference, to change reality on the ground. Can you share with us a little bit about that UNRWA situation and how deeply rooted it is within Hamas and vice versa?
Yes, I mean, it is a very deeply rooted problem. It's on a systemic level, of course, and you've implicit in what you said, UNRWA has knowingly enabled Hamas to use its facilities as military headquarters, bases, and depots. It has knowingly and consistently taught generations of children to hate Jews and want to die a so-called martyr's death. And it has facilitated the transfer of hundreds of millions of dollars into Hamas's war chest through currency conversion fees, through the unique decision of UNRWA, by contrast to any other UN organization, right, to pay its employees in US dollars, thereby forcing them to use Hamas money changers to get shkalim, which is the actual currency in Gaza. So beyond that, as you've said, these are processes, the education, the physical collusion over military activity and the economic assistance that involve thousands of people, thousands of UNRWA employees. But in addition to that, you have dozens of UNRWA employees who are actual senior Hamas leadership figures today. Right. Ismail Haniya was a teacher at an UNRWA school. And there are many examples of this. You have UNRWA employees who participated in the October 7th attacks, who killed, who took people hostage, who kept hostages, tortured them, and so on. And so it's quite plain to the eye, and people have been working on this issue for a very long time, that UNRWA cannot and isn't willing to reform from within. It can't and it won't. But the challenge is to forge a viable alternative, and that takes time. So
let's talk about the mission now. The meetings with leaders, with politicians in US, Canada, Europe, about reimagining such an alternative. What have you done? Where did you go? And what have been the message and the responses to it?
Yes. So we have sought to enable the same Gazan voices whom you've seen platformed through our project to communicate with the outside world, first through Whispered in Gaza, then through Voices from Gaza, and now through direct engagement with members of parliament in Canada, Spain, Italy, and Germany, in addition to the US Congress, where we've organized closed-door meetings in which they are patched in by video conference.
Okay.
And they speak directly to lawmakers and answer their questions and make their arguments about what they feel needs to happen next. And what they feel in sum is that there need to be enclaves, protected enclaves where they can pilot self-rule and forge alternatives to UNRWA for aid distribution. And the case that they are making, which we have found many MPs in each of the countries identified are sympathetic with, is reduce funding to UNRWA and reallocate the balance to these efforts. In other words, why are anti-Hamas Gazans weak politically? Because no one ever invested in them. No one ever gave them an opportunity to build their capacities. Hamas was funded to the nines by its friends, but the international community, democratically minded liberal countries, did not support opposition to Hamas. So what they're saying is, let's break out of the binary choice between maintaining UNRWA funding uncritically and as is, and cutting it off entirely, which is seen to be unworkable for the present time, and simply reduce UNRWA funding and create a new trust that is designed to enable anti-Hamas Gazans to organize themselves.
And in this respect, what were the kind of reactions you heard from those elected officials? Were they bound by the spell of the old ways, or were they open to, crafting new ones?
We found actually a very warm reception for the site here because, look, there are people who are have some kind of attachment to UNRWA, but a larger number of people they recognize the problems with UNRWA that UNRWA officials have themselves acknowledged.
Right.
They don't deny these things that I mentioned and that others are bringing to light. But they say, look, it's the only show in town. What is the alternative? So when someone comes along and a group of Gazans present an alternative, and it's deeply moving to hear them communicate this, and people say, of course, this is a no-brainer. We have to help these people. It's the same humanitarian instinct that got the world connected to UNRWA in the first place.
Right, but was abused to the core, and the result of which we're seeing at the moment. I'm wondering, from your vast experience, Joseph, of interacting with decision makers and elected officials, there was such an issue with UNRWA. For years, they have been fomenting the conflict, facilitating terror, harboring Hamas. This has been evident for everybody who was engaged with it. How do you explain the lack of desire to find a new way? Even before October 7th, this has been the reality. The blindness, the willful blindness of democratic, liberal governments and officials who looked this reality in the eye and refused to engage with it in any different way, knowing what's happening on the ground. Why did we even choose to go on that path, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, your question relates to a number of questions about how is it that the international community allowed this dynamic to persist for so long.
Right.
In some ways, it relates to the conceptia too, because this is something that was tolerated as part of a miserable but least bad option by Israel as well for many years.
Right.
It's because for the simple and understandable reason that nobody wanted to have to go in there and occupy the country and occupy the area and so on. So people settled on a very unhappy stalemate, and UNRWA was an essential part of that stalemate. Now things are in flux, and there is a possibility of forging a better alternative.
Amen to that. And you mentioned the Israeli government, and I want to ask you, under that vision, and I'm not sure you have all of the answers, but it's a question that is in all of our minds. who would be that entity? What would be that entity that would secure those regions for non-Hamas Gazan self-rule and aid distribution? Who's going to do that? And the second question is, what has been the involvement, if at all, of the Israeli government with your initiative?
So the answer to the second question is very simple. There's no Israeli government involvement. We're an American nonprofit, and we engage these Gazans directly and have been doing for years now. We simply follow the logic of what we learn through this direct communication going on for so long. Now, to your first question, you wanted to know who would protect these enclaves.
Correct. What force on the ground?
Yes. So if enclaves would be established, to cut to the chase, they would need to be protected externally, that is, protected from military-grade assault from the outside, rockets and so on, by the IDF. And Gazans understand that and accept that. They know that at least for the time being, there isn't about to be a multinational force coming in and entering. Show me the country that wants to send its boys and girls to patrol Gaza today. So the bad news is that this is something that requires external protection by the IDF. It's not a desirable reality, and it's not desirable for Israel. It's not Gazans' first choice, but show me an alternative. The good news is that there is the wherewithal among these Gazans to patrol their own territory internally and develop over time a stronger fighting capacity. And we believe that the path toward building international support for reconstruction in Gaza runs through such an initiative. Our knowledge of governments in the Middle East, Arab allies of the United States, is, they used to say philanthropists who give money to Islamic institutions and education will always say, "Show me the mosque," meaning before I write the check, I want to see the construction that is underway on this mosque. Once they see an enclave that is viable, where people are administering their own affairs and have a better future, several things happen. First of all, it becomes a much more realistic destination for international investment and support. And second of all, it poses a serious political threat to Hamas. Because if you have even a small area with tens of thousands of people living in it, where they have food, fuel, solar electricity, talking on the phone, and beginning to organize a rules-based system, 500,000 Gazans are going to want to live there. And that presents, as I say, a political threat to Hamas, which it has not faced in all of this time. It's been facing military assault, but no one has mustered a political campaign to challenge Hamas's case for governing.
Right, which at the end of the day would be, as we call it, the ultimate victory over the organization that translates the tactical and strategic military achievement into a diplomatic political currency that will be the only guarantor of any viability for the near and maybe even long distance future when it comes to living in the region. And this is why your initiative is so exciting, Joseph. And I want to ask you, this is the core of that discussion about the day after, right? Of what's going to happen in Gaza beyond. So I mentioned the Israeli government because, as you said, Israel is the viable force on the ground at the moment. Has there been any kind of information sharing? Did you present these plans to anybody within the idea for the Israeli government to share and get their view and their take on the proposal?
Well, we wouldn't be doing our jobs if we didn't engage all stakeholders in the region on these issues. And in the West, not only the US and Canada and countries in Europe and in the Middle East, to understand where they're coming from and what issues they see, and also to share with them what we're learning about what the opportunities and options are.
In a way, it's the most important intelligence. to understand
Yeah.
what the desire is and where the population is going. Have you heard anything from those ordinary Gazans about their attitude vis-a-vis the Palestinian Authority? Was there any expressed desire to see the PA take over Gaza?
So the PA is a more popular alternative in Gaza than Hamas. So that 70% I mentioned that last 2 summers ago said they would like to see Hamas disarmed and replaced. The alternative option that was offered in the poll was the Palestinian Authority, and they took it. But there is also a current, particularly among young people in Gaza, that perceives the Palestinian Authority as corrupt. A lot of sort of older people who haven't actually been to Gaza for 19 years,
Right.
who might sort of exploit the situation to maintain what is effectively a very corrupt regime. And they feel anxious that they would be sidelined in such a situation and they wouldn't have an opportunity to actually emerge as leaders in the territory that they never left.
Right. And so the option on the table or the idea behind it, when you talk about those autonomous regions within Gaza, are these based on clan rule? The local clans?
We feel that the notion of clan rule is not helpful in this day and age. Among the reasons, number one, the clans of today in Gaza are not the clans of 25 years ago, in the sense that there's no clan that doesn't have elements in it that are affiliated with Hamas. And so, but more importantly, you have to reach for a rules-based system that is not based on favor for one clan or another, or some kind of a patriarchal hierarchy of tribal rule. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't an important role for clans to play in lending their clout and support to an effort. But if you're going to have a viable system, it needs to be a rules-based system that is, in some sense, egalitarian and open to people, regardless of their clan affiliation.
Right.
And that's how you get the best of all identities and affiliations within Gaza, provided they are willing to commit to a rules-based system.
Right. And to that we indeed say, Amen, Joseph. Your efforts are incredibly blessed, and it's always revitalizing and interesting to hear your take of realities on the ground, especially when it comes to Gaza. And who knew, when you started and the kind of work that you've been continuously doing in getting the truth out of Gaza has become more relevant than ever before in trying to decipher not just the past and present, but also the future of what's going to be in that part of the Middle East. And as you said so rightfully, it has direct projection onto the vast Middle East and Iran's ability to continue and destabilize the region.
Well, thank you, Shahar. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and of course, thank you for everything you're doing to really get the word out about the truth of what's going on. So, very
Amen.
grateful.
And to that we say truly amen. And to you, our viewers, you've just heard it. A truly fascinating take on what reality would be like in the Gaza Strip, hopefully beyond the war, and in a future that will guarantee maybe some peace and tranquility to a much needing area. We here at JBS continue to work to provide you with the best insights of what's happening in the region. All along, we remember that it's not just about Israel or Hamas. This is a battle between good and evil that has ramifications not just on the region, but across the world. We thank you for joining us and pray together that we shall see better times soon in Israel and across the world. Thank you all for watching, and hope to see you soon on JBS.